Hello, everyone. I am working on presenting about 10 to 12 minutes on rational decision making on chapter 3 and creativity. I'm not spending as much time on creativity. There are assessments you can take, and you can read about it in the text. I will say that if you look in this module, I would highly recommend that you go review the 4 videos that Jim Smither has made on the rational decision-making model. And that's what gets a lot of attention. When we think of decision-making, we have knowledge in terms of that decision-making. And most of us get our knowledge from explicit knowledge. This is what we get from classroom and from training sessions and from being around information and internships and all that. This is knowledge that's easily available. The real wisdom comes from tacit knowledge that's highly personal in nature based on experience. It's almost impossible to articulate this instinct to others. So a lot of times, people with a lot of tacit knowledge tend to make decisions on instinct. Now, really, we might say flying from the gut, but that gut is based on a lot of experience and knowledge. So most people who have a lot of expertise make what they call programmed decisions. They can look at a situation and know exactly what to do. Most of the decisions we're going to face are non-programmed. What that means is we need more information, and that's where the rational decision-making model comes in. There's 4 big steps. The first is defining the problem. This is an area of, some would say, the most important. You got to really define the problem. A lot of people have difficulty over this. If you listen and watch the other video I made on problem framing, it's another way of looking at dealing with problems. A lot of times there's a lack of consensus around the problem, or accepting that there's a problem or a definition of it. Sometimes we confuse symptoms. Like we say, hey, the problem around here is we need more money. Well, that's a symptom of what the problem is. Or the problem around here is the morale is really bad. Well, the morale is a symptom of something else. So the most important step, and maybe the most time-consuming, is defining the problem. Next is generating alternate solutions to the problems. A lot of times we short-circuit this. You've heard of techniques of brainstorming. These are all ways that get at a lot of alternatives to a problem. It's one of the things we do, though, is we evaluate alternatives when they come in. And a lot of times few alternatives are known. And a lot of times we base alternatives on what was successful in the past. The third area of the rational is evaluate and select an alternative. And a lot of times some of the constraints there are, it makes sense. Okay, we get 5 alternatives and then we evaluate. Well, sometimes we can't get all the information we want. Sometimes gathering the information is costly. A lot of times we have preference for an alternative and we are biased. Next is implementation and problem solving. Sometimes we don't get acceptance, there's resistance. A lot of political things happen. So while the rational decision-making model makes sense, sometimes it's hard to implement. So if you look at this, you say we identify the problem, we develop alternatives, we evaluate them, and we use accurate information, and then we pick the best, and then we evaluate it. Over here, it says we boil the problem down and make it easy to understand. We have a few ideas. We evaluate as we get them. We use distorted information and then pick the first acceptable. So these are some of the problems associated with decision making. Now, if you remember when you did the day-long assessment, you did the assessment on leadership styles, and you talked about different styles: an autocratic, consultative, facilitative, delegative. These are similar styles as to what you talked about on that weekend. Depending on the type of employee you have, you might opt a different kind of style. But we do this same thing in decision making. So, an autocratic or directive leader makes decisions. The consultative, or maybe the more supportive, the facilitative or more supportive. These are all words in here. The delegate is where we turn everything over to the other person. And it's what we do maybe for the high ambition type of people. So when you're going to make a decision, how the leader makes it is based on a number of areas like this: decision significance, importance of the commitment, likelihood of the commitment. These are factors to take into account. Just like when you were doing the day-long assessment, the leadership style you adopted was based on certain factors in the follower. So remember, in the leadership day, you talked about supportive, directive, participative, and it was all based on characteristics of the subordinate, or what the subordinate had to do. So one of the assignments that I gave you is to look at about the first 20 minutes of the movie 13 Days. It's about the Cuban Missile Crisis, where our president had to come up with the decision. And I want you to analyze that tape, the decision, based on looking at the rational decision making, but also looking at this model here. What style should the president have used based on these criteria? So that's it. If I wanted to give more time, there's a lot out there on biases we have in making decisions that are well worth looking into. All right, so that's it for now. Now I will stop this recording.